Aw. Oh my gosh.
We're about to get started.
Yeah.
I'm asking the cat.
Oh. All right.
They're so adorable.
She is.
Right there.
Today we want to chat about labels and how we use them. Hi, my name is Argentarius, and with me is Saoirse.
Hello. And today I'm done up as a purple dragon.
Purple and green?
Yeah, purple and green.
Yeah. And today I am my zebra self. For anyone that's listening, we're both wearing fishnets. I'm wearing red fishnets. You're wearing purple,
Well, yeah.
lavender. And we're both wearing kind of matching corsets with filigree. Oh, you also have your purple crown today.
Yes, I'm wearing my chainmail flower crown that I made.
So to start us off, what are labels?
Well, we'll just start with a dictionary example.
Yes.
That's going to be kind of the easiest. So, to define labels, they are a name or a phrase that's used to describe the characteristics or qualities of people, places, and things.
Some of examples of this could be like you could qualify a food as being Chinese, right? So certain food is labeled as Chinese food. You could label books as fiction or nonfiction. You could have live theater or...
Yeah, or it's a musical theater, or pare it down a little bit, but it's still fairly broad.
Exactly.
It's multiple things or a combination of, or hits so much criteria of said thing.
So the labels that we're going to talk about today are labels that we apply to ourselves. So what are some labels that we like to use?
So, as you can probably tell from, the flags that we have in the background, we're on a few different things. So, in sexuality, we're asexual and bisexual.
We're on the asexual spectrum.
Yeah.
To be more clear, right?
Yeah, to be more clear, we're on the asexual, it's a spectrum of things in that umbrella.
Yes, and there's probably more labels that we could go into further with that, but it's underneath the sort of asexual umbrella.
With gender, there is also non-binary and trans and gender fluid.
We tend to kind of use non-binary as the sort of umbrella term, as a category of transgender that is neither femme or masculine.
Yeah.
And gender fluid, I'm actually considering using that one. I know you started using that one more because you feel like your gender is kind of fluid.
Yeah, and it includes a non-binary and agender things that it can evolve into. And some days I do feel feminine, some days I do feel masculine. Sometimes I feel like a combination of the two, sometimes neither. So that's why it's kind of gender fluid for me, includes being non-binary as well as combination as well as agender.
But we often shorten it to just non-binary.
Yeah, because more people understand that, and it's a little bit easier than being like, today I feel, or this hour I feel.
Yeah. For me, I feel non-binary applies to me because I don't necessarily feel masculine or feminine all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like that necessarily describes the whole of my gender expression and experience. I like to tell people that my secret third thing is species. I get to turn into different animals.
Yeah.
And then we have disability.
Yeah, we have disability.
We're
as you've
autistic, ADHD. I am deaf.
We both have chronic pain. That's just a tiny list of things.
Those are some,
big buckets, big labels that fall into things. Those tend to also kind of affect some of the other things that we have, disability-wise. We have subcultures that we belong to and we use the labels of. One of them that I've used for a very long time, it is not a phase and I still use, is goth. I'm in that scene, I'm part of that subculture, and I have been for a long time. There are different ways that I express it, and part of it.
I am more recently identify as goth than you, but I love the music. I'm also part of the subculture. If this doesn't count as goth makeup, I don't know. But you don't necessarily need to dress goth to be goth.
Yeah.
I also identify as therian, kind of going back to the whole species thing, and furry and pony.
And I'm therian and furry as well as pony. Well, what talking about. That's why we also say like what we're dressed up as. That we also have different affinities for different things sometimes, and different ways we express and label and all that fun stuff. So
these are just a small example of some of the things that we identify and some of the labels that we use for ourselves.
And we list some of these in most of our bios and things of that sort.
I think that brings us to our next topic a little bit.
How and why do we use these labels? And it's an easy thing to like put in our bio or put as tags.
It's like a shortcut.
Yeah.
It's like shorthand. It quickly conveys a lot of information in a short amount of space.
Yeah, and can give kind of a very big like starting point for people, which, as we were kind of doing a little bit before, saying, you know, asexual as a spectrum, and you can delve more into it. So that's why the labels don't necessarily define us. We define what they are and what they mean to us specifically.
I think that's an important part because we apply these labels to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
This is not other people applying these labels to us is a key thing. And we're generally pretty much open books. And for anyone who is curious about us and wants to know us a bit better, they can be, like you said, starting points.
Yeah.
It's sort of like conversation starters, and behind all of them, we kind of hinted at it when we listed them, there's more to it behind the label. That's how they don't define us. We define the label. Is there's more to it behind them that you can always do a sort of roulette wheel. You know, which label do you know, hey, let's take asexuality and go, what does that mean to you? Or how does that apply to you?
Yeah. It's kind of a good way of finding similar experiences.
It's a little bit easier to find people who have similar experiences.
Yeah, not the same, because, you know, we're all have varied lives and things and different intersectionalities of things. But that's why we use it kind of as a shortcut to be like, hey, might we have something possible in common? Or as a way of like connecting and getting to know each other. So as we, you know, go more into it.
Yeah.
And as we go into, you know, what does this mean for us? Where does this go? And then even if we don't end up having similar experiences, it can help us convey and still have, you know, empathy with others.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I didn't know about said label and what that means and how that has manifested in your life. So it's a way of also getting to like know other people.
Yes.
You know, as a roadway for empathy and sharing of experiences.
Right. I like hearing the uniqueness of people. And so, you know, even though we have maybe shares some of the same labels, how they uniquely apply, getting to know the person better is quite an adventure. But we also use it for accommodations. I think a really good example of that is I started using the label deaf because out of need for accommodating, right? Now, a label that might apply better to me in my specific case is probably hard of hearing, but that is a longer mouthful. And people, it's sort of, I don't want to say this minimizes the hard of hearing communities, but a lot of times I feel that when I've said it, it is perceived as a more minimizing term than deaf, right? And so it's easier for me to access some accommodations if I just shorten it to I'm deaf. And I'm not the only one to do this. I read an article, I forget the author or the title of the article now, but I read an article a while back who is very similar, and I was on the fence about calling myself deaf because I don't want to necessarily weaken the deaf community, so to speak, but...
Yeah, that's the other thing, is like that people don't also understand even within deafness, there's a whole wide range of spectrum.
Yes, similar to blindness. I don't have that, but you know, that can happen to anyone as well.
Yeah, where you might still have some vision, or there is total loss, or you have blindness in one eye but not the other.
Or ambulatory mobility.
Yeah.
Where you might need a wheelchair sometimes, but not all the time.
So it falls in that same range of, especially if, you know, people aren't responding or giving the accommodations that you need without the labels. So that means we do a lot of research into ours, and for some of our things we do have like formal diagnoses because it's required to get set accommodations.
Exactly. I was on the fence, like I mentioned earlier, on the fence and researched what other people
With your similar experiences.
with similar experiences before I started applying the deaf label to myself. That doesn't make me immune to some criticism,
Yeah, but you have to
of
use
course.
hearing aids, otherwise it is a lot harder for you to really hear,
Yeah.
and it's not getting better.
And then we did a lot of research before we figured out that we were autistic, right? We were kind of on the fence about that for a good while, and then we did a lot of research. Some people would argue that's kind of the autistic path.
Yeah, let me research this.
And
Yeah.
I guess I was on the fence about like the asexual for a long time.
Yeah,
In fact, when it was first suggested I might be asexual, I was like, no, that's not me. I like sex just like the other person, you know?
but no, you don't.
No, it's different. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot of difference, and that's why there's nuance in it, and that's why we talk about the asexual spectrum, the autistic spectrum, because there's a bunch of varying.
I see
know,
a lot of people like
trends.
to see extremes sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when people think deaf, they think like full deaf, you can't hear a thing.
Yeah, you can't hear absolutely anything.
Or blind, you're full blind. So also when people think like asexual, people think, oh, absolutely no sex. Often people think like sex adverse too, but that's not always
Yeah,
the
sex adverse
case.
or repulsed. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
So
can be, but that's not
it's
always.
possible, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, so it runs into a little bit of the
Yes.
difficulties.
Yes. So what are the difficulties or challenges with labels?
What we run into, essentially talking about that, is where people only see it as like one thing, and they
Yes.
can't explain or expand on it.
Like if, unfortunately, like the handicap sign is like wheelchair symbol.
Yeah,
People think that, okay,
you have to be bound to it forever.
you can't get up on your two legs sometimes, kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it runs into binary thinking in a lot of ways.
Right.
Of, oh, you're this or that. And some people themselves end up kind of getting stuck that way once they have that label, and are just, because that's how they've been taught, a lot of labels are used.
You're talking
is-
about like, let's say you get early diagnosis of something.
Yeah.
And that kind of becomes a early identity early on in your life.
Yeah, and it's like, even though both you and I are autistic, we're not autistic in the same way,
Yeah.
but it can happen of where, like, either early diagnoses or just that's how you're taught and grew up with it, or how it's gotten applied is you use it as I do this because I'm autistic. Or like you just say stuff like I'm autistic and that's that. It's like, okay, but how does that manifest for you? Because it manifests differently for me.
Right.
So trying to figure out, what does that mean?
I think I see what you're saying. You're
Yeah.
talking about like when it becomes a conversation stopper. Right?
Yeah.
Instead of like, okay, how can we work around this? How can we
Yeah.
accommodate you?
How can we work
essentially.
with this, or get to know you, or just telling me a label only tells me
Yeah.
some potentials about you,
And it just kind of stops there.
or where it can be used like that. So then it's some of the difficulties that we run into is trying to connect and understand more.
Yeah, we tend to not use our labels like that.
Yeah.
So we don't understand when we necessarily meet people who do use labels like that. It's, let's just say that it becomes challenging, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not our understanding of how labels work.
And because, I mean, even in the same with, we happen to get, diagnosed, but not everybody can. But still, even in diagnosing, you only have to kind of meet like thresholds in certain ways and areas. You don't have to have every single box of this label ticked in order to be considered this. It's more so like, okay, you have, same with like ADHD. Is, are you inattentive, are you hyperactive, or are you a combination? And then like, it's essentially the amount of like severity in multiple things in multiple ways. And we don't all have the same, severity in the same areas all the time.
Right. Yeah.
But if you're just like, I'm this label, okay, well, that can mean a bunch of different things.
yeah. Because
So that's where our confusion comes in, is because,
how does that present?
yeah, how does that present? What does that mean for you specifically? we know how to get to know you or do, accommodations and that sort of stuff.
Right. I guess to give a more concrete example, like when, let's say, we're hosting an event or something like that,
Yeah.
and we need to know ways to accommodate people because not everyone has the same abilities. If we can't enter in a conversation about like how does certain labels apply to things in your life experience, then
Yeah.
we can't accommodate you. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, when we're looking for accommodations ourselves, if people don't take our labels seriously,
Yeah.
to begin with from the start, that starts us on like the wrong foot
Yeah.
with a lot of people.
Yeah,
And
where
then
they don't believe our labels.
they don't believe our labels, and then we can't expand further into like, here's how you can help accommodate us,
Yeah, or here's what this
Yeah.
means. This is what I'm expecting, because some people will be like, oh, I don't believe in that.
Oh, I thought that was just for children.
Yeah.
Like being autistic is just
Yeah.
for children. And it's like, no, it stays with you for life.
Or they then accuse us of using that as a shield.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, of like, oh, you're just using that to, not have to do work or whatever. And it's like, no, I'm trying to use it as a starting point and talk about, because I wasn't able to talk about my accommodations any other way. It was like, in workspaces especially.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, we kind of run into,
Yeah.
the flip side of that, of where people think that we're using it as, a shield or a conversation stopper when we're trying to use it as a starting point.
I mean, ideally, we wouldn't have to be diagnosed, but the reason
Yeah.
why we pursued diagnosis is so that people could take us seriously, those people
Yeah.
who wouldn't.
It's like, no, we had to spend money to do this and time and effort, and
We're privileged to be able to do
privileged
that.
in that and
but-
lucky in some ways to be able to do that. I mean, it was still, saving up, finding people,
Lots of research.
lots of research going into even finding where we could or how we could, because we're immigrants,
Yeah.
and just a whole bunch of steps. So it wasn't necessarily like, yay, easy, but it is still also a little bit of a privilege.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was in order to, because people weren't taking us seriously before. So it's like, okay, how do we go get them to take us seriously? Okay, well, now we have to go the diagnostic route. And still, even then, it's, well,
Yeah.
I still don't believe in that, or that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's pretty appalling.
And we run into, like, kind of along those lines with morality coming into it.
Yeah. Where people attribute morals to a label.
Yeah, specific morals to specific labels.
Either that could be both positive or negative.
Yeah.
I mean, just identifying yourself as trans now is seen as, well, one, political, and two,
Yeah.
like either a moral positive or a moral negative by others.
Yeah,
It's very
depending on which
polarizing.
groups. Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
And where it runs into of along the same lines of like, oh, if you're autistic and you're an adult, then you're a kid,
Oh,
essentially. So you still have to,
Infantilizing.
yeah, you're infantilized. So it's more seen of like, oh, you're putting care upon me, or you're not very, or even if they know a little bit more of like, oh, well, you do black and white thinking, so there's, I'm never gonna change your mind about anything,
yeah.
or you're just stuck in your ways
Okay.
because you have a kids thing.
So I know
Like,
we talked about gender, we talked about disabilities a lot. I want to kind of switch it back a little bit to maybe subculture.
oh yeah,
So, like, I remember we lived in a time where being called a furry, and this is another difficulty and challenge, is when people attribute the label onto you.
yeah,
There is such an issue where people will call people furry as a slur,
yeah, as a derogatory.
as a
thing.
derogatory term, and these people, they may only just put on ears. Maybe they like cat girls from anime. They're not part of the furry fandom, or they're not part of the furry subculture.
Yeah,
They may have nothing against furries, but now they might not want to associate with furries because people call you a furry just for wearing ears and a tail.
yeah,
And it's important that,
and make it seem like it's a bad thing, because if you're a furry, you're all of these other
and
descriptors.
going on to the moral thing, I thought that because you are a furry and you're kind of used to the idea of, hey, animals as characters is pretty cool. And because we were, discriminated against, essentially, that other furries would understand other subcultures that are kind of related, like therians. But when I tried to explain therian to furries, I got a lot of the same language that people use to be derogatory towards furries from other furries.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that this is all furries that do this. Of course not. There are therians within the furry community. But this was actually when I first started going to furry conventions and meeting other furries for the first time. I'm like, that kind of shattered my world, you know?
Yeah.
I attributed that furries would be better at this, which is not true. Furry just means you are a person that likes to have or are a fan of anthropomorphic characters and you identify as part of the subculture.
I didn't run into as much shock with that, I think,
Oh.
because I started as goth.
Yeah.
And
Goth doesn't necessarily make you a good person,
Yeah.
necessarily. Like, none of these labels make you a good person.
yeah, none of them
or a bad person.
or a bad person. They're just, they mean certain characteristics, but not moral things. But yeah, running into a lot of the elitism in goth subculture that can and still does happen of, oh, you don't listen to this specific band, so you're not a true goth. And stuff like that. It was like,
Oh,
No.
yeah. The one true way.
yeah, the one from one true way to be a goth.
Yeah.
Or like emos or this, that, and the other of like kind of being against some other cultures, or like punk is its own thing versus seeing like any of the similarities, or like, oh, you can only be one and not the other, or in both.
I want to hang out with emos. I want to hang out with goths. I want to hang out with punks.
Yeah.
These are cool people, you know?
Generally speaking.
Yeah, generally speaking.
Yeah, but so I had run into like that elitism stuff before I really got into.
That's also gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was used to it, being looked at from the non-subcultures of, oh, you're a goth, you're this, that, and the other, and using it as a very, like, degrading thing or label, or being like, oh, it's just a phase, you don't know what this means or what you want. Like, at what point does it stop being a phase? It's been, like, a good many years now. So, where you run into issues within your own labels of certain things, of you're supposed to have this certain morality, or you're supposed to have this certain trait, or you're not this, or you're not that.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, just want to say, people are not infallible. Even us. Like, we make mistakes, right?
It's a matter of catching yourself and working to repair it.
Exactly. I have a story about that, if I may. So when we were first figuring out that we're trans and getting into the trans community and figuring out, like, oh, hey, we had been non-binary for a while before, and identified as non-binary for a while before actually entering into the local communities here. But being, I guess, kind of new to it, even though it was later in our life, like I was saying, it's not a good thing to apply labels to someone else.
Yeah.
But I made the mistake of a trans man was talking about his sister, and I was like, your sister might be trans, or at least kind of hinting at it or something. And he was like, wait, did you egg my sister? And I was like, oh, dang, you caught me. Yeah, I totally did. Sorry. Egging means like calling someone trans before they're ready to supposedly like hatch out of the egg as trans and kind of self-discover. It's one of those things, it's very personal. The act of egging someone or trying to identify someone as trans before they're ready for that.
Even if they are, that is
Even
also...
if they are, it can prevent them, like put them further back in the closet. It can hinder their growth. But it's not good necessarily to do.
Yeah, or it can also very easily start getting into like bioessentialism. Certain areas of like, if you are this way, then that must mean this.
Yes.
Like, oh, if you are a man, you're evil. If you're a trans man, you're extra evil.
Right.
Like,
It kind of gets into that territory.
yeah, of where it can really easily veer down that
Yes.
way of, like looking for the signs or things. And
Yes.
we're all primed to do that.
So thankfully, I
Yeah.
was called out on it, and
Yeah.
I didn't double down on like anything. I was like, I kind of checked myself and figured out like, oh,
yep, that
yep,
is what I was doing.
that is what I was doing. Sorry.
I will, work on making sure I'm not going down those paths.
Right.
Try and catch, ourselves with.
And hey, we still hang out.
Yeah.
We're still friends.
Yeah. So that's, it can happen at any time to anybody. In
Exactly.
Any group under any umbrella. But that's one of the things that is part of the difficulty and challenges with labels. is
Yes.
Not getting as wrapped up in them.
Right.
Or trying to apply them to other people. Mm-hmm. Which ends up running into therapy side of stuff.
Yeah. So how do therapists, since I know you're studying psychotherapy right now, how do therapists see or use labels?
In general terms,
Right.
essentially, most therapists are using them as a starting point.
Okay, so kind of like how we use them.
It's a little bit of a difference between now and even not too long ago, but and some of the, especially in westernized stuff, that's a thing we have to be very mindful of is decolonizing therapy.
What is westernization? That's a topic for another video.
Yeah, that's what I don't have the time. But because
Oh no, I have to pay for your time.
exactly, not yet.
Not yet. Once you graduate.
One day. Yeah, so using labels in therapy is only meant to be used as like a starting point or as a basis for helping. Some therapists choose to not use or give any labels at all possible.
Right.
So we don't run into the calling somebody X, Y, or Z if they're not, or pushing them down that path. But unfortunately, in a lot of places, especially like the United States or, even in places in Europe, therapists have to give a label, which is a diagnosis, in order for insurance.
That pretty much is in line with my experience with my therapist back in the US, because my therapist, we didn't talk about labels or anything like that, or like what specific things were. And at that point, I did not know that I was autistic or some of the other things. And my therapist was like, yeah, I'm going to give you the bill. It has a diagnosis on it, but don't think too much of it. I just have to put this in for insurance. He told me, like, my belief is that, I don't want to assign labels to anything.
Yeah, you tell me what you are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's been more and more trends lately of essentially the labels that are used in therapy, a lot of like diagnostic labels or terms, are coming outside of the therapy rooms and being used as, we see the terms like therapy speak and things like that. And so those terms and those labels are being used outside of their intended context, which can start causing harm in various ways, such as like minimizing the support needs by saying like everyone's a little autistic, or I'm so ADHD, or I'm so OCD. It minimizes people that are having very hard times with those things and terms and makes it being like, oh, well, just get over yourself. And so it very much, using these labels over and over and over again dilutes the actual meaning and context. And yet, are there some problematic ones still left in therapy? Gosh, yes. But like, it's still for those that are, using them to get support, to get accommodations. It makes it harder and harder for them to get it because the general population is like, everybody's a little like that. It's not that bad. So that's where using these labels and terms outside of their intended context and their use can start to cause harm. Westernized therapy and, kind of decolonizing it. It's been used and is being used in certain ways of like othering, outcasting, pathologizing behaviors or groups of people.
Right.
That's how a lot of dissenting people were like labeled, especially, you can look up various cases of especially black men in the US were, given specific labels, and that's how they're pathologized and then, institutionalized and put in mental health hospitals and things like that to break up groups. And
it reminds me of like the war on drugs and how there is, I don't know if I can say this on YouTube, but like there is a certain madness that comes from doing a certain drug, X madness. Yeah, it's basically just to other and outcast those groups of people who are doing these things and applying that label to them,
Yeah, under the guise of like mental health.
Right.
That's why it's a madness or a malady or a disorder.
And then now I guess, well, first off, let me just say labels are here to stay. If you are someone who believes that you can live without labels, like completely live without labels, you could probably avoid some labels. Like you may not need any disability labels. You may not need any gender labels necessarily, but you still have them. They're on your passport or your license, some form of ID. We use them all the time, and
like
they're useful.
Talking about like, the innocuous stuff at the very beginning of like Chinese food versus Italian food versus Nigerian food. Nigerian is a label. Italian is a label. It's a broad label.
Right.
But that's what labels are meant to be, is kind of big umbrella things and starting points.
Right.
China is a broad term, whereas we might actually mean, no, this is more of a Hong Kong dish, or this is something you just find more in like Beijing.
Right. But I want to kind of, to bring it back a little bit of like labels are useful.
Yeah.
We use them because they're useful. And going back to therapy speak, right, that we were talking about, I think we need to be a bit critical when people use therapy speak. And even when people claim that something is therapy speak, because I feel like therapy speak might be getting a little bit overused in some cases as well. So just be a little bit critical when this is happening, when people are using it and being like, are they using that correctly? Are they applying the label to someone else?
Or themselves.
Or themselves. How are they using it is the key.
Yeah. Are they using it as a shield? Are they using it as a conversation starter? Are they using it as a starting point, as a general umbrella term, for themselves? Or are they doing it any of those above, but to somebody else?
And like we were saying before, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, that's how we learn.
Exactly.
It's not fun sometimes, but at the end of the day, we're human, again, which is a label.
I don't know what you're talking about. You're a dragon.
Oh, that's right. I am a purple dragon today. But again,
I am an equine zebra.
it's a learning curve.
Exactly, yeah.
It always is.
So we have some questions for you. What are some labels that you like to use?
And what are your experiences with using labels in general, or the labels that you do like to use?
We'd love to hear your stories. And are there any labels that you would like us to explain more? So any of the labels that we said that we have that you'd like us to expand upon? Thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon. Thank you for joining us today. Hope to see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye. I have activated the cat. Oh.
Go. Yeah.
She is hardcore laying on you.
Okay.
Meow.
Yeah. Do you have more to say?
What do you have to say about labels? We label you as a void cat. Very interesting.
All right, we'll leave you alone. Yeah.
I want to thank all of my Patreon members for your support. And in this video, I want to give a special shout out to Sam Roach. You are awesome.